Welcome to Information About God. Today, we're going to take a look at the question about Noah's flood. Is there evidence for Noah's flood? And we're going to look at kind of a corollary to that. Is there evidence for a global flood? So let's jump right into it. One point of evidence, actually 1.33 parts to it, is ancient flood stories in the Mesopotamian, in the ancient Near East area. For example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which some of you may be familiar with. This is allegedly from around the time of 2100 BC, and it comes from that region, and it does bear many similarities to the account of Noah that's found in the Bible. So this is one here. So let's take a look at that. So Gilgamesh was allegedly king of Uruk, and was he a mythical? Was he a real person? It appears because there is a Sumerian king list, which does put him in the list of kings at that time. Samaria, the area, again, around Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, maybe Turkey, that region. So it appears that he may have been an actual person. We're not going to really get into that in detail today. I don't want to go there. But the point is, there was a person, and there is an account. It is ancient, and he allegedly lived around the area, Mesopotamia, in the 26th century BC, so rather ancient. And this is generally considered to be one of the older stories. However, we'll come back to that with Noah. It is possible that the account of Noah did exist prior to Moses compiling it in the Pentateuch around 1400 BC, and it would have been in other forms. But at any rate, Gilgamesh is considered to be one of the oldest accounts of a flood narrative. And this is an example of, actually not an example, this is the actual artifact, which you can find in the British Museum in London, if anyone happens to get over that way. So this comes from the Encyclopedia Britannica, but there were 12 tablets that were discovered. These were ancient clay tablets written in cuneiform, so you can see that on there. And it was found in the area of Nineveh, which is modern-day Iraq. You might be familiar. Nineveh is, of course, mentioned in the Bible with the story of Jonah. But this artifact dates to around the 7th century, roughly around the middle of the 7th century. And this is where the Epic of Gilgamesh is recorded. So on tablet 11, we're not going to read all of this, so don't worry. But there was an individual, clever prince. He said to this individual, build a boat, essentially. Again, you can read this translation by Maureen Kovacs. It can be found in ancienttexts.org. You can read the whole thing. It's rather lengthy, so we're not going to go into all that today. But bottom line here is some key points which you recognize as corresponding with the account of Noah in the Bible. This individual is told to build a boat and put some living beings in the boat and then go into it. And the dimensions of the boat are given in some detail in the Epic of Gilgamesh. For example, the length must correspond to its width. Now, this is an interesting point here because this describes it as a cubical shape or a square-shaped vessel, which would actually not have been very seaworthy. And you look at boats of today, and the description and the details that are given in the account of Noah in the Bible actually lines up and matches up very closely with boats that are used even today, with the dimensions and how it is constructed with length and width and height and so on. So the Epic of Gilgamesh, again, it probably got some embellishment, some legendary elements, and they got some of the details perhaps wrong with the dimensions. At any rate, Gilgamesh goes on to say walls were 10 times cubit. Anyway, we won't go into all this in detail here today, but you can see it lists decks, and it also lists levels, and inside of a compartment. So rather detailed description, which does seem to make a lot of sense if you're going to build something like this to survive a lengthy flood, to be able to keep some animals in there and some of your family members perhaps. Now, an interesting thing I want to just mention here, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, bitumen is mentioned, and pitch, which would have been used to seal against the water. And we actually see that in the Bible. We'll take a look at that in a moment. But So hold on to that thought. But the Bible also mentions in Genesis chapter 6, and it gives specific dimensions, which is kind of bears some similarities in some ways with Gilgamesh. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, rather lengthy, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. So it is longer than it is wide and high, making it a rather seaworthy aquatic vessel. So make a roof on it, put an opening on the one side and a door on the one side, and make decks on it, similar to Gilgamesh. So here's the mention in Genesis chapter 6, verse 14, where Noah is instructed by God to make this of cypress wood, but make rooms and coat it with pitch inside and out. So again, pitch, the word copper, or pronounced kopher, is probably like similar to bitumen. Somebody can probably correct me on the very minute differences here, but we're looking at a substance which is carbon-based. As you can tell, it's very black, and even today this is used in materials. So here's a kind of a raw form you can see on the left, and then on the right is a somewhat more refined in a liquid form. So this is probably what Noah would have been used to seal it against the elements and against the rain and the waters and so on. And then again, that does match up with what is in the Epic of Gilgamesh and what is in the Bible and what would have worked at that time. So let's go on. Gilgamesh, and a couple more points on Gilgamesh, and we're going to get into some others. So if you're getting bored here, just hang on. But 6 days and 7 nights came the wind and the flood. Now this basically states that ended after the 7th day, and the sea calmed and the floodwaters stopped. Now in the Bible, it states that there was a much longer period of flood, 40 days. The flood kept coming on the earth and lifted the ark high above the ground. So now here, let's take a look at another story. We looked at Gilgamesh. Here is another ancient flood story, Eridu. And this is again from the area of Nippur, Iraq. And Iraq, again, would have been the region which we're not going to go into today, the Garden of Eden, but that's where the early humans would have been, Mesopotamia, and the earliest humans in that region. So this makes sense. Here's another flood story from that area dating to the 17th century BC. This is also on baked clay with cuneiform as well in the Sumerian language. And in this flood account, a man is warned of a flood coming, similar to Noah being warned by God of a flood coming. Eridu becomes aware of God's plan. The gods, there are multiple gods in this story, plan to destroy the humans. And the king is instructed, and he builds a boat. And similar to Gilgamesh, 7 days and 7 nights. And then after the flood is over, he goes out and he offers sacrifices to the gods. So you can see here, this is a source from the Penn Museum, but this is the artifact itself that was found. So this again matches up with the account of Noah in the Bible, where Noah got off the boat, and after it landed, after quite some time on the ark, and offered sacrifices to God. So similarities there as well. Let's take a look at a third ancient flood account, Atrahasis. And here we are again in Iraq. This is Sipar, southern Iraq region. This was found, dating again also to 1700 BC. Interesting. So similar to the last one we looked at. This is an Akkadian flood story. Enlil, the king of the gods, he became annoyed with the humans. They were making too much noise. We won't go into the story. You can read that yourself if you want. But he said there's going to be a flood to destroy the human race. And again, this is a source of this in the British Museum, if you get a chance to check that out. So Atrahasis, just some key points here. There was one good man in this Atrahasis, which allegedly the name means exceedingly wise. One of the gods instructed him to build a boat, put his family on the boat, and put some animals on the boat. Doesn't that sound familiar? Now, a little bit of a difference here. Supposedly Atrahasis needed to do this, and the gods, they needed to leave some humans, a small number of humans alive. The humans were kind of annoying them, but they needed to leave some alive because they needed humans to do the hard work. The gods didn't want to do the hard work and to make offerings to the gods. So anyway, we see some definite similarities with the story of Noah. So three ancient Near Eastern flood accounts. So let's take a look, move on to the subject of, is there evidence for a global flood? And so good question here. God told Noah in chapter 6 of the Bible, I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. So that sounds pretty definitive, all life, right? He goes on to say in verse 17, every creature that has breath of life in it, everything on earth will perish. Again, that sounds pretty conclusive. Everything on earth will perish. So let's dig into that some. Some more verses that didn't seem to indicate there was a global flood. Now, I understand there is some debate among even Christians. Christians were brothers and sisters. We can debate on this issue and not divide, in a sense. Some people believe there was a complete global flood. Some people believe it was not completely global. So we're going to take a look at some more details on that today. So let's jump into this. God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people. Pretty conclusive. I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. Genesis 7, and then also goes on to say, all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. How can you argue with that? That sounds like a global flood, right? All the heavens, or all the high mountains under the heavens were covered, right? And then Genesis 7:23, every living thing again on the earth was wiped out, people and animals. Seems to be very conclusive. Total global flood. Everything is destroyed. All the high mountains are covered, right? So let's dig into that a little bit more in detail. So, and one of the things we want to be careful of, and we want to remember in reading the Bible, reading the Old Testament, which written in Hebrew, some Aramaic, mostly Hebrew, reading the New Testament as well, which we're not talking about today, but is written in Greek. We want to look at the original language and the way that the people at that time would have understood it. Ancient Hebrew has many fewer words than at least the word count in the Bible, many fewer words than we would use today in English. It's not a criticism of ancient Hebrew, but the words had to be considered in their context and in their meaning. So let's take a look at what you might say, well, what does that mean? Okay, oh, well, let's talk about it. So Genesis 6:17, I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature has breath of life. Everything on earth will perish. So the word earth here, what does this mean? This is the Hebrew word, eres, pronounced eretz. You look in the Strong's Concordance, H776, you want to take a look it up, used over 2,500 times in the Old Testament. This word is used a lot. It's used in every single book in the Old Testament. I did a quick search on that. It's even used in the book of Esther and Ecclesiastes. Every book in the Old Testament, it appears that word can be found. It's used quite a bit. So let's take a look at some of the usages of this Hebrew word. Eretz is translated most of the time, about 1,500 times, as land. It's translated over 700 times as earth. And then a few times as country, and then ground. So these are the ways that it's translated into English. So the one Hebrew word translated into different English words. And sometimes those of you who speak several languages, and especially anyone who's familiar with ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek, for instance, knows that there's not always a perfect one-to-one correlation on the meaning of words. Sometimes, again, we do have to consider the context and the meaning that the author intends. So let's take a look here. Other Bible verses that use this same word, eres, same Hebrew word that was used in Genesis to describe the global flood. Genesis chapter 8 goes on to say, now this is actually after the floodwaters had stopped. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. Eris, same word, the earth was completely dry. So if you want to take the very literal meaning of this verse, Genesis 8:14, the earth was completely dry. So does that mean polar bears had nowhere to swim? Does that mean that the Marianas Trench in the ocean was completely dried up? There was no water on the earth at all. That's what the verse, if you take a literal meaning of this verse, that's what it seems to mean. The earth was completely dry, right? So let's take a look at some other verses in the Old Testament that use this same Hebrew word. Genesis chapter 41, we're looking at the story of Joseph. Familiar with that? We won't go into detail on that, but Joseph sold into slavery in Egypt. There was he was warned by God to go ahead and stockpile grain because there was going to be a famine at that time. So in Genesis 41:57, it states, all the world, Eris, came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. So all the world seems to indicate, if you want to take a literal meaning, you're a Bible literalist, you have to believe that Aborigines were traveling from Australia to buy grain in Egypt from Joseph. You're going to have to believe that Mayans were coming from Central America and traveling to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. Does that sound reasonable? Another example, let's take a look. Same word used, speaking of Solomon. Now we're in the book of 1 Kings. It says, familiar with the Queen of Sheba who came to see Solomon because she heard about his wisdom. And anyway, the whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom that God had put in his heart. So does that mean, again, that Inuit were traveling from Alaska to the area around Jerusalem to seek an audience with Solomon? Does that mean the Chinese were traveling all the way across Asia to seek an audience with Solomon? Well, if you have a literal translation of this, the whole world sought an audience with Solomon. Okay, well, maybe they sought an audience, but maybe they didn't travel. But the point is here, the whole world, we have to understand the whole known world might be a better understanding of that. If you're going to translate these literally, then you're going to have to say that Inuit were coming from Alaska and they were trying to seek an audience with Solomon. So does the whole earth or the whole world equal the whole globe? Again, we have to keep in mind the ancient audience. They were not stupid. These were intelligent people, and they probably believed that the earth was round. Yes, despite what some people might say today, flat earth and all that. But I think the ancient people, they were intelligent and they were not stupid. So, but we need to look at the word usage in the context. When they heard the word Eris used, did they picture the entire globe, the orb of the earth, or did they consider, well, this could mean the known world or the land of Mesopotamian area at that time? So this is a point that if you're familiar with John Walton, if you're not, check him out. He's on YouTube. He's got some good videos out. He has some good books, including The Lost World of the Flood. He's an Old Testament scholar, ancient Near East expert, and he's fond of stating that the Bible is written for us, but not to us. And what that means is we can extract messages, we can get lessons, we can get information from the Bible, and the Bible is accurate. We're not saying it's not accurate and it's not true, but we have to consider that it was written to a different audience. It was written to the ancient people who lived, in this case, around over 3,000 years ago in the Middle East. Very different culture, very different understanding at that time. Again, they were not stupid, but it was written for them. And you have to consider, as John Walton also is fond of saying, of the cultural river at that time. How would they have understood the word Eris to be used in the book of Genesis? So let's take a look now. We're going to move on to a couple of examples of some modern day evidence. We looked at the three ancient flood accounts, Gilgamesh and Atrahasis and so on. Look at some modern evidence for a major flood. So in the book Noah's Flood by Walter Pittman and William Ryan, a couple of geophysicists published in 2000, they discovered that there was a major flood, a major deluge, approximately 7,600 years ago. And they were using sound waves and coring devices in the area of the Black Sea, some rather modern equipment to examine that. So let me just set the table here a little bit. Now the Black Sea is down. If you can see the cursor here, the Black Sea is down here. Now this is Europe, and this white is glaciers. Now the last ice age, which lasted, best evidence appears to be that it lasted from approximately 115,000 years ago to approximately 15,000 years ago. Long ice age, right? So, but the glaciers began melting, sometime between 10 and 20,000 years ago. And the ocean levels, since coming out of the last ice age, have risen approximately 400 feet. So it had nothing to do with humans flying on airplanes or burning hydrocarbons. But the glaciers, they covered, you can see this, all of the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, and so on. They covered the areas that are now modern day Poland and Germany and so on. And as these glaciers receded, they, of course, the ocean levels rose. And what was happening was in the area of, now we'll take a look, this is the Black Sea. We're going to be focusing on this because this is where a lot of the evidence is. But down here, if you can see, there's the Sea of Marmara, and then this is a Bosporus Strait. So this is connecting the area around Istanbul, Turkey, with the Sea of Marmara, which is connected with the Crimean Sea, which is connected with the Mediterranean Sea. So anyway, connecting all those dots, the point is those are saltwater, and the Mediterranean, as everyone's aware, is at the same level and connected with the Atlantic Ocean. So this is all saltwater, this is ocean level. So you might have inland seas or lakes that are at different levels, but of course, the Mediterranean is at the same level as the ocean. So the Bosporus Strait, now this comes into play here in what we're discussing, as this is a strait, as you can see today, boats can move through that, but many years ago, perhaps 7,600 years ago, approximately, this was a landmass, and the evidence seems to show by Ryan and Pittman that there was a deluge where the waters came from the area of the Mediterranean over into the area of the Black Sea now. So the Aegean Sea, did I say Crimean? Anyway, Aegean Sea, which is in the area of Greece, and again is at the same level and connected with the Mediterranean. So what appears to have happened, and these researchers found evidence that there was a major deluge about 7,500, 7,600 years ago, overflowed the Bosporus Strait and flooded the Black Sea. The Black Sea was a freshwater sea previous to that. Let's take a look at second example, independent study reported in the National Geographic in May 2001 under Black Sea discoveries, evidence for an ancient flood about 7,500 years ago, very, very similar to what we just looked at. This was done by Robert Ballard in the area of Turkey, again, which is Black Sea, borders Turkey, the coastal line of Turkey for many miles. They discovered evidence of a flood about 7,500 years ago. They took core samples. Again, they found there was an abrupt change about 7,500 years ago from freshwater to saltwater. So the Black Sea was freshwater, and then it became saltwater about that time. So what these researchers looked at was carbon dating of mollusks. And for example, and this is one piece of evidence among others, but there are certain mollusks, again, I'm not an expert on this, but which live more in freshwater and others which live in saltwater, and you can determine that. So what these researchers found that at the lower level of the Black Sea, the mollusks were found, and the ones that they dated to around 9,000 to 12,000 years of age were freshwater mollusks. So the saltwater mollusks, which they found in the Black Sea, were dated to less than 7,500 years ago, indicating there was a transition from freshwater to saltwater. And so you can take a look at this here. This, again, the area of Turkey. And these could be maybe the northern regions of the mountains of Ararat. We'll get into that in a minute. But the ancient sea level is roughly around 500 feet lower than the ancient sea level, lower than it is today. So there was a major deluge about 7,500 years ago, and it increased the level of that sea. And one of the points that is made by the researchers is that there was a very thriving civilization around the Black Sea at that time. They found evidence of that, and it appeared to be a very fertile region. And it appears that humans were thriving very efficiently in that area. And then this major deluge came, and the people basically had to leave or died or whatever. But and they also found, just real quick, shipwrecks under the Black Sea. And there was one wreck in particular they found, which was in the lowest level, which would have been an indication of a boat that existed probably at the time before the deluge in fresh water. And there was an anoxic layer, which interestingly, this was found, it was about 1,000 feet down. And anyway, it may not have been that old, but at any rate, what happened was, at that lower level, the hydrogen sulfide replaced the oxygen, which means that organic types of materials such as wood in the boat were preserved very, very well, which is kind of interesting. So that's one of the things that they found. So let's take a look back. Get an idea of the geography, and here's the Black Sea and Turkey, and of course the Mediterranean, which is now connected with this strait. And here we can look Mount Ararat. The Bible actually describes as the ark coming to rest on the mountains of Ararat. So on the 17th day of the 7th month, it came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, which are allegedly around the area of northern Turkey, not far from the Black Sea. So that would make sense if there was a major deluge of the Black Sea at that time, that it would have flooded that whole area, and the ark could have come to rest on these mountains. People who say they know exactly where the ark was, they found the ark, I'm pretty skeptical of that. I don't know that anyone really has found that today. But at any rate, it did come to rest in that region. So is there evidence for a worldwide flood? One of the criticisms that people will make, people who maybe you might say are Bible literalists, will say, well, what about aquatic fossils found on the mountaintops? And that is true. You go into the Himalayas, into probably the Rocky Mountains, other high mountains in the world, and you can find fossils of fish, ancient fish, and so on. Well, how did they get there? And some people interpret that and say, well, that's evidence of a global flood where the waters covered everything, including Mount Everest. So, well, is that a possible viable explanation? Well, let's take a look here. Many years ago, and I'm sorry for those who might be young Earth creationists. I apologize here. I'm probably going to have problems with this. But at any rate, I think the evidence does seem to show pretty conclusively that there is tectonic activity, and the plates of the Earth have moved over many years. And if we go way back to the late Permian period, about 255 million years ago, there was a major land mass, which has been termed Gondwana, Pangaea, where basically South America and Africa and India and North America and so on were pretty well connected at that time. And then the plates moved apart over many years. Well, anyway, at that time, there was an ocean, and let's take a look here on this slide, has been termed the Tethys Sea. And you can see as the continents are moving apart, here's Eurasia, North America, and here's the Tethys Sea, over here a little bit south of Asia. So at that time, there would have been many sea animals, of course, fish and aquatic life for sure. So how does that play into this? Well, here's the Eurasian plate, and approximately 40 to 50 million years ago, the land mass that is now India began moving across what is called the Indian Ocean at this time. But many, many, many years ago, it was the Tethys Sea. So at any rate, this landmass is moving, and it is still moving today and pushing up the Himalayan mountains. So if you're familiar with geography, India and the Eurasian plate, and that is where we get the Himalayas in that range because of the two plates coming together. So that offers a very good explanation of how aquatic fossils got onto the top of very high mountains, well, because of plate tectonic activity. So the Indian plate coming in and hitting into the Eurasian plate and lifting up, say, the Himalayas, for instance. So what we've seen, come to a close here, we've seen evidence corresponding with the biblical account of Noah. And there are at least three different ancient accounts that we saw: Gilgamesh, Eridu, and Atrahasis, which have very striking similarities with the account of Noah, lending credence to the idea that there was a major flood at that time. Now, there have been some changes in the story over time, but there was a major flood. So, and then we also looked at a couple of examples of recent evidences of a major regional flood in the area of the Black Sea around Turkey, the mountains of Ararat, which would correspond very well with what is in the Bible also. Feel free to reach out, contact me, information about God@gmail.com if you have any comments or anything of that sort.